everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? While we wait for everyone to join the room, we would love if you can just put in the chat where you're joining us from. That would be awesome. We love to stay connected with everyone from all the different places that we're joining this Zoom room from. All right. Thank you for joining this town hall tonight. Before we get started, I just want to quickly go over some Zoom functions. So tonight we ask that only BIPOC voices are present via the mute and unmute button, and we ask that allies participate throughout the chat function. You can stop your video on the left side bottom screen of the Zoom. We greatly appreciate videos on. It can be very intimidating to speak to a crowd full of people that you don't know behind the camera, so that would be appreciated. We have live transcript turning on in just a second. So once that is on, you can be able to change the view of that and drag the transcript around the screen if it's blocking someone's little box, if you're unable to see who's speaking. And we have the reactions at the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. So we have a clapping, a thumbs up, a heart, if you want to send some love to someone who has just spoken. And if you go to the more, you can view the full transcript if you would like to. And I think that's it for the Zoom functions. I'll turn it over to Sam.
Good evening, everyone. We're so happy to have you here. My name's Sam Fletcher. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State Chapter of NASW. So at the beginning of all of these, my son and I provide a little bit of Native culture. And we'll start by, I'll tell you, I am a member of the Cherokee Nation. And Seth, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Seth. I'm a member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe.
And what's your Native name?
Oh, my native name is Firewolf.
Yes, so we typically, when we do this, we typically talk a little bit about our culture, let people know what that looks like and everything, but we actually wanted to talk about a recent trip we had and some things in it. So we visited Iceland at the end of July, the beginning of August. And there was a couple of things that stood out. One of the things I want to acknowledge is that Seth and I have very different experiences being Indigenous. We both identify as Native and we both live by Native principles, but my experience is very different from Seth's because I don't face racism. And Seth, we talk about racism every day. And I would say that it's safe to say that pretty much anytime you're in public, you face racism quite a bit. Like it's kind of part of your daily life.
Yes.
And we have very different experiences. And it's really important to acknowledge that. And that's one reason why after we do this part, I don't speak in these meetings because I have full white privilege. I do not have the lived experience of racism. And we really need to be hearing from the people who have the lived experience of racism. So when Seth and I were in Iceland, we have a friend who is Icelandic and she is also not white. And one of the conversations we were having there, because our friend Lean, she also lived in the United States for 3 years. And she was talking to Seth about how he's really not free living in the United States because of the racism that he faces. And she made the statement that, you know, if you lived here, you would be safe all the time to walk. You could walk around any time of day wearing whatever you want and you would be safe. And what was it like when Helene told that to you?
I mean, when she told me that, I kind of felt surprised. Like it felt kind of nice. I was like, I wouldn't mind doing that. Like just to be walking around any time of day and I could wear what I wanted and like there wouldn't be a problem with it. Like I wouldn't be stopped by anybody and saying, why are you wearing that? And, like people would suspect me of something. Like that would like there wouldn't be a problem with that in Iceland. Like I'd feel happy and I'd feel more comfortable with myself about it. And it sounded nice to me for that. So,
and we were talking about when she was explaining this, we were talking about, I couldn't wrap my mind around it. I said, I literally can't think about what it would be like to not worry about Seth and not worry about the racism that he faces every day, and the danger that you have faced, being a very large person with dark skin. So that was one of the things we want to talk about. The other thing we want to talk about, we always talk about land acknowledgements and what land means to Native people. And Iceland for me was absolutely the most beautiful place that I've ever been. And I think probably the reason for that is they treat the land like Native people. So in Iceland, it's against the law. You cannot pull your car over onto the side unless there's a parking area to do so because it harms the land. They will build a road around a stone because you do not disturb the stone. The stone is part of the land and you don't disturb it. It's actually against the law to cut the moss in Iceland. So the moss is thousands of years old. So everything they do is to protect the land and to treat the land with respect. And similarly, the air was much easier to breathe. The water, you could drink, one thing they told us at the beginning, you can get water anywhere. You can go into a gas station and get water out of the bathroom and it's going to be just as good as the water you get anywhere else. And that was true. So like the water is cleaner, the air is cleaner. Like you can tell the huge difference of when you treat land with respect versus when you don't. And I just wanted to end by asking Seth, we saw some really incredibly beautiful things in Iceland. What was your favorite thing that you saw while we were there?
Personally, my favorite thing was the waterfalls. All of them, the ones that we went to, personally, they just felt so much more relaxing to me. Like the sound of them, I just felt so much more at peace. Iceland in general was just so relaxing. If I had the chance to go back there, I would. Like the land, and they treat the land with just so much respect, and like I just appreciate that about Iceland. It's just everything there is just so respected and everything. So,
and I think that one thing just to add, so like we talk about, like we usually do like the land acknowledgement part, is that we always end with treat the land like the Native people treat the land.
yeah.
Climate change would not be a thing if you treated the land the way the Native people treat the land. And we saw that in Iceland. It was so cool. It was just so incredibly beautiful and healing to both of us. So thank you for listening to us. I'm going to hand it back over to Olivia.
Thank you so much for that, Sam and Seth. And Iceland sounds beautiful. And I definitely put that on my bucket list after hearing about your trip. I'm going to pass it over to Cecily to give us a grounding before we get started with our prompts tonight.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Olivia, and thank you, Sam. And just really love your grounding and your introduction always, and having your son in this space as well. It's just, I was just so welcome it and appreciate it. So thank you. And just welcome everyone for being here. Always so grateful to be in this space, in these town halls. Always love the dialogue that comes up. So this evening, you know, we're going to engage in a conversation. We're going to open up a dialogue about the term BIPOC. And, you know, we use that term. This is how we kind of identify ourselves, that we're having BIPOC spaces, where, you know, centering BIPOC voices, et cetera. And something that came up in the last town hall in August, you know, something that started to bubble up both in the chat as well as in the discussion, was around this term, some people having feelings about this term and whether this is really the best term that we should be using, if there's another term, and kind of just like what's coming up for folks. Because it's, you know, it's becoming apparent not just in this space, but in so many spaces where the terms that we use actually, you know, like what does it mean when we say BIPOC? What does it mean? And how you're situated, then, you know, sometimes you have a reaction based on how you're situated. So that's the conversation we're going to engage in this evening. Just a couple of grounding, you know, centering things before we get started. I do want to say, as in every single town hall, this really is a space for BIPOC participants, again, I'm using the term BIPOC participants to share their stories. We're really centering the voices and experiences of BIPOC participants. We ask that white identified participants listen. So you can absolutely, listen and participate in the chat, but we do ask that you do not speak during this session because this session is really to, center the voices of BIPOC participants. This is a space, and particularly this evening, right, depending on what comes out, this is a space of discomfort. Sometimes when we're having conversations about this and engender strong feelings, strong reactions, can be uncomfortable. And part of our learning is learning how to engage in dialogue and embrace discomfort as a movement towards growth and transformation. With that being said, I encourage you, each of you, no matter how you're situated, no matter how you come into this space this evening, lean into the discomfort, embrace the tension to the extent that you are able. And again, understanding that a healthy amount of discomfort is necessary for growth and learning. But I also want you to become aware of when you're becoming triggered, when something's kind of rubbing you the wrong way, or you're sort of like having a strong feeling or reaction. Become aware of that. And I encourage you to sit with that and be curious about what's coming up for you in that space, in that time. And also know when it's becoming too uncomfortable. When is it going from a place of, okay, this is like a healthy amount of discomfort to this is now too uncomfortable for me. You're getting triggered in a way that you need to step away and take care of yourself. So part of dialogue, having these dialogues, is knowing when you can be present, but also when you need to step away and take care of yourself. So I encourage all of you to do whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, whether that be just turn your camera off or step away from the computer, get a drink of water, take a walk, whatever that is to keep you grounded and centered. And again, with our conversation, we're not here to just argue. We do want to hear divergent viewpoints, right? And also to hopefully, by the end of this session, hopefully come to some sort of understanding, agreement. Maybe we're not totally happy with it. We're all not going to be happy with it, but just some sort of agreement, understanding for how NASW in particular can move forward regarding the use of the term BIPOC, or maybe we're not going to use that term. Maybe we're going to use something else. But this is that conversation. So thank you again for being here. And that is our grounding. And I'm going to turn it back over to Olivia so that she can open us up in our dialogue.
Thank you so much, Cecily. So I guess I'll open it up with how do we feel about the term BIPOC? Who is included in the term? From last town hall, we got the feeling that there were some generalizations about the term. So I'm just seeing if anyone would like to start our conversation with their opinion on the term BIPOC.
Hi, my name is Kah-Tee. How are you doing?
Hi, Kah-Tee. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Sorry, I'm at internship, so I may not be able to stay on camera, so I'm gonna do this real quick. I saw this and I thought it was interesting. So I don't know how everyone feel about this, but I am in my third year of the social work program. And when I first started, I kind of heard the term people of color. And I guess because I'm a Black person, like I'm Black, I always thought people of color was always referring to like Black people, but just kind of like the politically correct way to say it. Because if you say Black or African American, it sounds kind of rude depending on who your audience is. But then when I was in the school, they'll say people of color, and it was like a pool of people from different ethnicity, which I understand. But I think one of the things that I'm processing is we're no longer saying Black when we're talking about like the history of like Black people, right? We're saying people of color, and it's kind of being roped into this one thing. And I feel like it invalidates the Black experience. And I don't know what other ethnicities that fall into the people of color umbrella feel about this, but I think for me, when I've had conversations with my friends, it takes away from the Black experience. We're talking about slavery and all of that, but then it seems like in conversations now, it's trying to like minimize history by saying people of color, because then everybody's experience is looped in so it can be inclusive. And that's fine. We're all about inclusivity. However, I'm going to stand on the fact that it takes away from Black experience. So in my program, we had an infinity course for, you know, racial justice and cultural oppression. And I appreciated that course a lot, but there were people that was in that course that felt like their experience wasn't spoken, they wasn't spoken enough. And to be transparent, I don't feel like this is my place to kind of testify on that, but I've had other classmates who talked about like they didn't feel like that course spoke enough about Asians. They didn't feel like it spoke enough about somebody who was Ethiopian. And there was a pool of people that was there, and it was great because I got to be able to meet people who fall along the umbrella of people who are oppressed. However, the reality of it is everybody's experience is not the same. And also when we talk about people who are white passing, even though there is an oppression, they don't fall in the same level of what Black people go through, Black and brown people specifically. So like I said, this is not to offend people who fall under the umbrella of the BIPOC, right? I just think that for each of our identities, it really just it takes away from their experience, because one of those ethnicities is being addressed more than others or being diminished more than the other. I hope I said that. I'm a little bit wordy, but I think this is the extent of what I can say. So I hope it made sense. And so that's my take on it. So coming from someone who is, just to put a little spin to it, coming from someone who is a Haitian American and Haitian descent, hearing BIPOC takes away from the Haitian people and the revolution and all of that stuff. And especially during this time, my heart is breaking for what's going on with my Haitian people. So I don't want to be looped into politically correct saying BIPOC, because I think depending on your audience, you're not delivering the level of oppression and the lack of equality that each of these different, yeah, I'm running out of steam, guys. I'm gonna stop there. Y'all know what I mean.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kah-Tee. And I just want to echo what you said. You know, any comments, they're not made to be offensive to any group of people. So thank you for sharing that and getting us started with our discussion tonight.
This is Tyffani. I at times find it an overgeneralization when issues are specific to different communities. There are at times issues that are more prevalent in the Black community, and yet we'll just say BIPOC, which saying it that way makes it seem like a cuss word. But we'll just throw that out there when it's no, this is a specific issue that's impacting Black people the most, or this is an issue that is impacting the Indigenous community the most, and we don't separate them out and allow for their unique experiences. We are all historically excluded communities, and that is understandable. We are a global majority. We are the majority of the people, are people of color, but yet even in our terminology, we at times make ourselves how far away from whiteness by how we define this. So at times I make it very clear, no, I'm talking about Black girls. I'm not talking about BIPOC girls, or I'm talking about brown girls. Let me be clear on who I'm talking about, because each community has its unique experiences. And I think at times we just make it easy for the global minority who has managed to historically exclude us to lump us all together yet again as the alternative to whiteness, instead of saying Black people have their culture, Black people have their community, and then we divide them up even more so into Indigenous communities and tribal and brown communities based upon racial and ethnic backgrounds. And we need to allow for that. To me, it's laziness in order to lump us all together. So.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Dent.
This is Robert. I'm hailing from the West Coast with NASW-CA. And my question is basically connected with what Dr. Dent just said. It's been my experience that Caucasians do not split themselves up into German Americans, Italian Americans, and so on and so forth. So why should we? So I personally think that the label that we have is pretty much self-explanatory, which includes two groups that are most marginalized in the United States, which is Black people and Native Americans, Indigenous people. But that's just me.
Thank you for sharing, Robert. I'm sorry, I just want to address a comment in the chat. We do not offer certificates for joining these town halls.
Robert, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate the discussion points that are coming up so far. And we're already seeing some of the ways in which we have different experiences and we have different viewpoints regarding this term BIPOC, right? In what ways does it sort of decenter experiences that need to be uplifted, unique experiences that you need to be uplifted, maybe for, you know, just like to uplift and say, no, this is about Black people, or no, this is about Black and brown people. Or is it self-explanatory? You know, so those are the questions, right? And that's the dialogue that we're having this evening. So thank you for those who have spoken. And also just want to open up the space for anybody else who wants to share or any questions that you have, or yeah, just what's coming up for you.
I'm Yamal Medina. I'm an LCSW in California and near the Bay Area. I'm Latina and my husband's Black. I have 2 Black children, and I just, grew up in the 70s where, it was an all white neighborhood and just a totally different era than what we're coming up into. So I totally respect and understand and totally highlight everything that everyone's been said. Something to think about though is that again, where we've come from and what we've come from. Again, back, in the 80s, if you know the history of the labels that the Census Bureau has put on to Latinas and Hispanics and African American, all those labels, right? Those were brought on from government issued organizations. And I'm just wondering if, if BIPOC is something that came from the people, and if there's something else that we can come up with from the people, that it not be brought from the government issued label. And again, just to kind of compare it to where we've come from, we've come a long way. We still have a long, long way to go. But I just wanted to kind of highlight that. So I appreciate everyone sharing. Thank you.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. That actually was my next question as well. Who coined the term BIPOC? I feel like there's a lot of debate over that. So yeah, thank you for bringing that into discussion.
And my name is Josh Steins-Hall, and I am an LMSW in East Tennessee here. I'm originally from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm actually a part of various ethnic groups. Excuse me, I have the hiccups. My mother, who is Indigenous and Hispanic American, and my father is African American and Caucasian American. So I really don't fit into the traditional mold. And I would just agree with what the person said right before I spoke, not using some of those terms, because oftentimes some of us don't fit into that category in general. We belong to several different categories.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Josh.
I'd like to ask Josh, I think you really speak for a lot of people. I'm already seeing a lot of yes on here. So do you feel BIPOC is a great space and a great term for someone who doesn't fit under one category? Or do you think there should be something else that's created instead?
For me personally, I would say not to use that term. That's just me personally. And I don't know what other term could be coined for that. That's just my personal opinion.
This is Robert again, and I'm in Los Angeles, California. I meant to say that. I'm in Southern California. We got somebody in Northern California, so hi to you. My feeling is like this. It can be adjusted over a period of time. Like, for example, it used to be LGBT, then they had a whole bunch of letters after that. So over time, I believe that this particular term could be more inclusive to add more oppressed groups into it. So it may not, I guess it's a thing that could be made adjustments to, but this is just, I see it just as a start. And it could be fluid throughout.
I definitely agree that the term is just beginning to evolve.
Can I just ask a question? My name's Joy. I'm coming out of Colorado Springs. My thing was, I spent a lot of time in the military. I spent over 17 years in the military. So when I went in, I'm a child of the 60s. When I went in, our label, you know, the labels as far as Black people, we were Black people, okay? So when I went in the military, I didn't know about all these labels. So when I came out, all of a sudden I came into a world where people were labeling themselves. We had all these new labels, and I had to learn all of a sudden these new labels. Now it's BIPOC, and when I get off, if somebody can definitely give me the definition of BIPOC, I would greatly appreciate it. And then, as the gentleman just said, it's a growing evolution. We're going to add more labels to it, or more, you know, things to the end of it. And the first young lady that came on, when I was little, being called colored people was definitely a knock on me. I didn't want to be called colored people, those colored people. I didn't want to be called that. So now we are people of color, or we just switch letters and switch words. And I take it as, you know, now, like she said, we're just including a whole bunch of people without saying, hey, here's what you've been through. Here's the group and the things that you've gone through. As a Black woman, I go through a lot. I'm sure as Black men, a Black man struggle, I don't know what it's like. And a Hispanic woman doesn't know what my struggle is like. Okay. Yes, our skin is a darker hue. Each of us has different colors and different hues, but our struggles are very different. And you know, maybe somebody is discriminating against us just because of the texture of our hair, you know, or they assume who we are just because of our complexion. But to be called color or people of color, I take that as a slight. You know, I want to be called Black. I want to be called a Black woman. I don't take that offensively. So if somebody could explain to me, and maybe it's because I'm being old fashioned, but if I understand this BIPOC, I'm on board with that. In our college, at my college at CSU Pueblo, it's not a term that I'm familiar with. Now, the term that they use a lot, because we're in the Pueblo, Colorado, is a large Hispanic population, Chicano. Well, when I grew up, that was not a term that you used. You didn't say that word, Chicano. And so that was a term that I had to learn and embrace. And I was like, okay, so I'm learning things, you know. So if you teach me and tell me what is correct and what is acceptable, then I can get with it and understand it. So if you can explain that to me and just show me and tell me what this is all about, and not what this is all about, what BIPOC embraces, who we're embracing when we say BIPOC, I can get with that.
Thank you so much for sharing, Joy. I think you really spoke to the evolution of language. And just to clarify, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color. But thank you so much for sharing, Joy. I see Mimi has her hand up, or their hand up, I'm sorry.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well, how are you?
First, I wanted to say I so appreciate New York NASW for championing this whole topic about racism. I'm in my doctorate program, and I'm telling you, I cite so much of the stuff you guys say in my research. It has been very beneficial in supporting like my work that I'm doing. But I wanted to say to the first young lady, I definitely agree with what she said. We all are, people of color, and to some degree, we all experience oppression in some way, shape, or form. But the thing about it is when it does come to Black and Indigenous people, looking at the research, they are more marginalized than most people. Whether you're looking at the child welfare system, the penal institution, research shows that those two groups are marginalized. The disparities, the disproportionality is always higher for those two groups. And as a Black woman, I'm okay. Actually, I like the word BIPOC because it takes out, yes, we're championing, we're advocating for all vulnerable populations, but I don't want to take away from the Black experience, because Black people and Indigenous people have had to go through different levels of oppression. And so many times we get it the worst. Like we just do. And it's not because we say it, it's because research bears it out in numbers. Empirical evidence shows that. So I think when we are talking, we need to be specific, when we're talking about Black and Indigenous people, when we are referring to research or trying to support something that, we're advocating for. It is a difference amongst, Latinas, Hispanics. It's just a difference. And it's not saying that one person's experience is not as great as another person's experience. It's not about the severity of the experience. It's about we experience it the most. So I think we experience it on a larger scale. So it's not about the severity, but like I said, I think that when it comes to Black and Indigenous people, that it should be separate. I think but then also when it talks about the Black experience, it does kind of take away from talking about the Black experience with slavery, the diaspora and, redlining, just all of the tactics that racism, how it impacts Black and Indigenous people. So I don't believe that everyone should be clumped in together. I don't think that there should always be inclusion when it comes to advocacy work. But I think when we're talking about something in particular, that it should be Black and Indigenous. So I appreciate the word BIPOC, because like I said, I use it a lot in my research. A couple of my professors, they had never even heard of the word, so it opened up dialogue to even begin, to open their eyes that when you talk about systemic racism, there are groups that are, more marginalized than others. And, being able to support that with evidence to open up, especially in educational systems, it's important to open up people's eyes to how Black and Indigenous people are always impacted at higher rates than other minority groups. And then that's all I want to say. But again, I wanted to tell y'all thank you, because y'all are doing y'all thing.
Thank you so much, Mimi.
Yes.
We greatly appreciate that. And you sparked so many people raising their hands. So thank you so much for your great comment.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I believe Synthia had her hand raised next.
Hi, thank you. And I will mirror what Mimi said. I am so thankful for this group, and I have encouraged my colleague. I'm from Southern California, about an hour inland from Los Angeles. So I really do think you guys are just completely bringing it. I learned so much. I feel like it's a great dialogue. So I thank you for the work that you're doing. Question though, I want to know, is there a problem with that term? Maybe something that I missed somewhere, or are we just dialoguing thinking maybe there's a better fit? Because for me, at first I didn't know what it was. And then I was like, I like this. I feel like it's inclusive based upon American history. Black, Indigenous having their own kind of like letter based upon the American history, I thought was appropriate. And then people of color, because, we have so many different ethnicities and races here. But is there something that I don't know about? That's what, is there a scuttlebutt amongst, this is not, I like it, but I could be wrong. So
thank you so much. It wasn't more so an issue, it was just brought up at our last town hall. And so instead of kind of just ignoring what was brought up and moving forward, because we do use BIPOC in all of our social media and our outreach, if it's offending a community, we definitely don't want to move forward with that acronym. So we're just having this discussion to see how at least NASW New York State can move forward with our languaging, making sure that it's agreed upon with the general understanding. So thank you so much for sharing. I believe, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but Labibah, you were next.
Thank you. That was actually perfect. I have a few things. The term BIPOC came up in a meeting recently. I'm in Minnesota, so sort of in the hub of everything that's happening. And there was a couple of things that came up, including at least in that meeting, there were a few people of the Black community that were not comfortable with being identified as BIPOC and preferred the use of the term Black. We also had some Asian populations in the meeting who also had issues with the terminology. And then when we dug into it some more, it was sort of like identifying yourself as Japanese American or Chinese American or African American or whatever it was. So for each person, there's differing reasoning behind what feels comfortable with the term BIPOC and what doesn't. For me personally, and I think it opened some eyes within that meeting, was that I'm multiracial and they're very diverse backgrounds. So I'm 1/4 Korean, 1/4 German, 1/4 Palestinian, and 1/4 Lebanese. And none of those heritages mix together, like they're all in some way, shape, or form microaggressing against each other, or there's cultural issues that work into each one. And so I also don't look like any of those heritages on their own. And so for me, the term BIPOC feels inclusive and sort of encompasses all my identities into one. So for me, that's how it feels. And I know it differs for other people. Like Mimi, I'm also in a doctoral program. And one of the things that one of my advisors brought to me was, okay, where does the term BIPOC come from? And I haven't really got into it, but there's been a lot of stuff like the statements in the comments of this is just another form of white fragility trying to insert itself and take over a term so that, we can feel better about what we're doing or what we're saying and so on. But I was also thinking, why don't we use BIPOC as BAI? Because especially right now, we use BIPOC as centralizing the most minoritized communities, which are Black and Indigenous. And if we put AI, we're including the Asian community as well, especially with all the hate crimes that are happening right now, not only with Asian communities like Chinese, Japanese, Korean, but also Pakistanis, Indians, Middle Easterners that are on the continent of China that are experiencing things like that, including the Jewish community, which also fall into the category of Asian, if you look at the map. So just thoughts on that.
Thank you so much for that suggestion. I've actually never have seen it spelt that way. Could you type that into the chat if you don't mind? I would love to explore that further. I believe Jamila was next with their hand raised.
Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm sorry, my camera isn't working. I ain't talking without my camera. But yes, I'm loving the conversation. It's interesting. I think it's more a generational thing. I'm like Joy, I'm a 70s baby, so the word Black was like embedded in us 70s kids because we was born that generation of surviving, and I think it's also environment. See, I'm from New York, so when growing up, people of color, it was the N-word, people of color, Black, African American, and here that's always associated with just Black people. So when I'm starting to hear Asian people and other people coming in, it's new to me because if you're from a certain state, that's not how people view color. In the United States, if you even look Black, you're Black. So listening to everybody talk about I'm mixed with this, I'm mixed with that, it's confusing. But I'm learning a lot because I didn't really understand that some people in the Asian community view themselves as color. In New York City, we're not like I guess where some of you guys are from, like connected like that. It's segregated in New York City. As much as people think this is a liberal state, this is a very separated state. It's based on communities. Coming from a Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, I'm watching my community getting taken over by all kinds of people, white, Jewish, Asian, and I'm feeling like an outcast. So me sitting here listening to other people from different places viewing themselves as people of color, but I really think it's a generational thing. I think it's the youth wanting to just come as one and, change it up. That's how every generation is. Like, it's like the Black Lives Matter. When people go, all lives matter. So it's like somebody said it earlier. Sometimes when you hear things, it kind of takes away from the people who started stuff, like our grandparents. Some of the seniors don't like to hear the N-word, but I grew up listening to a lot of the seniors say the N-word, comedy and stuff. But as I got older, now that I'm in my 40s, I view it different too. So I'm viewing this a little bit different by BIPOC. It takes a little getting used to. I'm in the mental health and addiction field. So this is new to me because now people looking at addiction different than, how it was when crack killed our community, basically. It's like, oh, now it's a mental health thing now. And I got to sit back and like, wow, I lived through that in the 70s, 80s. And now people, people were quiet. Now, when it seemed like when a movement is happening, everybody wants to like, let's join the Black people in this, and we all come together. It's a little hard to swallow sometimes,
Definitely. Thank you so much for sharing. And I love how you said, you're learning, because that's what we all came here to do, to learn how to be better, how to use the term better. So thank you for sharing that, Jamila. Tamara, I believe you were next.
Hello, everybody. I guess it'll end up being a statement, but I guess I don't really have a lot of statements. It's just more questions and just wanting to share what the conversation brings up for me. This is a conversation I've had more, I guess, just more amongst friends and different things, very informally. So these are some of the things that comes up for me. I wonder if there will ever or can ever be one term that satisfies every single person and can stand the test of time. So that's always my first thought, because I can't think of one that ever has, so one, it's like, I don't think, okay, so I'm not gonna be too hard on us that we didn't do it this time with the BIPOC name, because like really nobody's done it, so not to say you stop trying, right? You always keep trying, but that's the one thing I thought, like, has there ever? Because when I think about that and how we are, really, letting this idea of BIPOC move around, it's a combination of some things, because it's a combination of someone's self-identity, whether it's an individual's identity or a community's identity, and then also just trying to find people for a specific purpose. So I think that even when you start with the first self-identity, right? Like we said, even people, it is not that hard to, even if you just say Black people, if I ever got all people that agree that they definitely are Black, you would still find people that pick different words, right? We get into that situation. I'm sure I came in like 15 minutes late, so I'm sure there's other people that identify that maybe, you know, other people don't consider, someone else might consider you to be Black, but that's not how you self-identify. Right. And then I've heard people say, well, you know, I'm just going to still identify them that way because the system in which we're working in will identify and treat them that way. So you're just going to get that. You know, so it's that battle between how you see yourself and then how the world sees yourself. And that can definitely be in conflict. And that's just difficult. I don't have an answer for any of that. Like I said, these are thoughts and questions. I also think historically about language, and then so language, not historically, and when you consider marketing. So the first thing I thought about that comes up to my mind when I think BIPOC is the NAACP, right? Because they're still using colored people. They are, you know, and I imagine for them, this comes up all the time for them because that's not really a term that's used. So the first thing I thought is, wow, I wonder how they battle with that because they still have the same acronym. It has not changed. But I think about when I read through history and different things, they had that name notoriety because the NAACP was the NAACP. It's been that name for so long, and every time they do stuff, even if they did it today, you know, it is still the NAACP, but we know what they stand for. It almost like the work that they've done has gone beyond their name. And like, I don't know if that's still true. Maybe they are going to change their name. I don't know. Again, these are just things I think about. How were they able to do it? Was it even right that they did it? You know, I don't know. And the other thing I think about too is, you know, I think sometimes we pick different stuff based on purpose, right? So I think both points are right. Where people were saying, well, sometimes if I'm just talking about Black girls, I'm not going to say BIPOC girls. You're not, right? Because that's not what you're looking for. That's not the purpose. I think in this purpose, I do believe in the purpose of what this group from what I believe the group is supposed to generate. I get why they use that word because it's a call for support. And you're saying, I want to find people who are having this experience based on what they look like, based on their skin color. So, you know, this is the best term I could try to come up with. So even keeping in mind that sometimes you're just trying to call people, but then sometimes you like people did identify, you do have to call things out specifically, because even if you group us together, we understand there is much more diversity within a group than they are between groups. So yes, when you separate us out, you know, sometimes I tell people, I just identify with the B part. You know, I see it as a term that is collective for a group, but I only identify with one letter. And it's like, all right, that's me, I'm in there. But I do get it that, right, depending on my purpose, I might not say BIPOC. I'm going to say Black. I'm going to say Indigenous. I'm going to say Native American. I will say Asian. I mean, like, depending on what we're talking about. So I think sometimes you have to think about the combination of language, purpose, considering harm, considering benefit. It's a lot of things that you have to manage when you're picking words, because I think when we get into more complicated work, things can't be cookie cutter, and it's very hard to pick like a one thing fits all kind of thing. Things are just more complicated than that. There's like other people who talked about that nuance, you know? There's just so much more going on. So I just also would like to say that I appreciate everything everyone's saying, and you guys really generated a lot of thoughts for me. So I just really wanted to share some of that. And, you know, hopefully find a place to settle on it tonight.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Tamara. You definitely generated a lot of thoughts in my head. And one of them was, does the intent behind using the word differ between who is using it and, even the wording previous to, the sentencing of it. So that definitely brought some discussion in my head. Cecily, I do see that you unmuted. Would you like to share?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, just echo you, Olivia. Thank you so much, Tamara, just for your, just all your thoughts on this term, right? And uplifting that it's just incredibly complicated. Like, I'm just like, it's just complicated, right? This is why we have to have a discussion on it, because it is so incredibly complicated. And I think was it you, Tamara, or somebody else raised the question, like, will there ever be a time where we have a term where it like just satisfies everyone and everyone's comfortable with it and we're all good and we know what it means? And then I'm seeing like in the chat, like, well, is that even possible? I don't know, but I really appreciate some of the things that you brought up in your talk. One thing, as Olivia said, the intent, right? What is the intent? And also, like, who does it harm? Like, when we use that term, BIPOC, right? Who does it harm? Who does it benefit? And in what situations is it harmful? In what situations is it beneficial to whom? And also, this issue, which we've talked about in so many town halls, and just it comes up so often when we talk about race, is how you self-identify versus how you're identified by the larger society. And sometimes there's differences there, right? And who's white passing, which people of color can actually pass for white, and which people of color actually are labeled as Black, and how do you identify yourself? So it's all so complicated and nuanced, and I just appreciate the fact that we're engaging in a conversation to be able to unpack some of this nuance, because it's not simple. So thank you, Tamara. And I see so many hands that have come up. Olivia, who's next? I see so many hands on my screen. But
I believe it was Lisa Allen, but please correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it is Lisa after Tamara.
Yes, hello. My name is Lisa Allen, and I am a BSW student from the great state of North Carolina. And I had never heard of this term before until I received the information about this discussion. So it's very new to me, but being from the South, I feel like it's okay, but I don't want to lose the importance of the history of being a Black person, a Black woman, the struggle of Black women, the struggle of Black people in the South and in the country, in the world, and worldwide. I mean, I can understand wanting a term that's inclusive for multiple races of people to feel like they have a voice, but I also want to not lose the respect of each individual race of people that this term encompasses, because I think sometimes that's where the lines can get blurred. And like I said, I'm learning a lot. This is the first time I've ever heard this, this term. But for me, like I said, born and raised in the 60s in the South, having to go in the back door to restaurants and buildings and doctor's offices and so forth. And I can remember that. I really, want the history to be preserved. I'm all about change, and I'm all about us progressing and being inclusive, but I don't want us to forget or kind of gloss over the history that we still see today, because there's still a lot of racism against Black people in America today, Black people in the world today. And I just don't want us to gloss over that by putting us in an inclusive term so that some people can feel better.
Yeah, we want to be inclusive, but we also want to acknowledge each demographic's own struggle with oppression and how we're still resilient to this day with it.
Exactly. And I'm afraid that sometimes, like others have said, we want we want everyone to have equality, but we don't want to diminish anyone's struggle while we're trying to get equality. Now, whether one term is ever going to fit everybody, I don't think so. But I think as long as there's respect for everyone's struggle, that when you have a term that encompasses a group of people and not just an individual type, just not a particular group, that, everybody can come to the table with the same respect, that I respect, your struggle. I'm asking that you respect my struggle. We can see the commonalities, because we're both human beings. We both have discrimination. We both have inequalities, but let's not try to diminish either one of us, how it affects us as a people, by just trying to group us all into one term and saying, okay, this group of people, XYZ is in this group and we know they have inequalities. So this is what we're going to do, instead of looking at each group as an individual group. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, Lisa. I believe Robert was next.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Well, I'm also a child of the 1960s when we were called Negroes. And we only had 1 week, Negro History Week. How many people remember that? As opposed to Black History Month. That's how far I roll back. I don't think there's going to be ever a case where somebody's going to agree on something, because we as Black people have not agreed universally on a term. From the end of the Civil War, when we were freed as slaves, we were called colored, among other things. In the World War II era, we were called Negroes up until maybe the early 70s. Then we became Black, then we became African American. Personally, since my 23andMe thing, I really consider myself a Nigerian American, because apparently my ancestry is Nigerian and migrant from South Africa, the combination. But what I'm saying though is that, did anyone ever watch that movie called Red Tails in 2012 with Neo and Nate Parker, so on and so forth? There was a scene after they made their first bomber escort mission where not a single bomber was even shot at or shot down. And they were invited into the officers club. And one of the officers said, well, we call you people colored, but you don't like that. And so Neo says, the term is Negro. They said it in chorus. Now, when you all get cold, you turn blue, right? When you get mad, you turn red. When you get sick, you turn green. When you turn cowardly, you turn yellow. You got the nerve to call us colored. I thought that was hilarious myself anyway. So I hope I didn't insult anybody. So I think for now, BIPOC probably would be the best thing to use for now, and then add on to it as time goes on, so people will not feel they're not included. And that's all I got.
Thank you so much for sharing, Robert. Mackenzie, I believe you were next.
Hi, everyone. I'm a Black social worker from Ohio. I have a couple of points, but I'm just going to start with that. I think that the term takes away, like, not only from Black people, but all of the individual experiences of the communities that are listed, and even more so the more nuanced communities within that label. I don't think that it also, like, allows for the examination of anti-Blackness by other marginalized communities. I think it's a term that's meant to, like, form solidarity, but I also think that burden is too much of a burden for just a term. I don't think language can truly satisfy solidarity the way that it should be satisfied. Another kind of issue that I had with it is that it includes people who are white presenting, but they're not, they may be like indigenous or something, but they're not actually being racialized. They could be being racialized as white. So I kind of didn't like the term at first for that reason. And I think someone pointed out like the different ways that the term is used. Sometimes it's used as like a personal identifier, which I don't really see that often, but usually it's used to describe like an audience. So even though I understand that it kind of, for me at least, it takes away from all the individual experiences of the communities, like there is a practicality sometimes of like trying to be inclusive and being concise at the same time. So I do think it's like it is a little bit difficult trying to decide what word to use. And lately I've been kind of liking the term racialized more. But there also could be barriers with that term as well. Another thing is that I don't think it gives room to explore the meaning of indigeneity, like for Black people, not in a way that it takes away from the experience of Native people, but meaning how Black people relate to the continental Africa. So those are just a couple of the things that I'm thinking about or that came up for me during this time. And that's Black people across the diaspora about how they relate to continental Africa, but still are interacting with like America as a country, or whoever they were colonized by if they experience that. So those are a few things that kind of pop up for me while I'm listening.
Thank you so much for sharing, Mackenzie. And you definitely made some great points. Anna, I believe you were, I'm sorry, Cecily.
Olivia, I just wanted to say, Mackenzie, but I just really appreciate your question. I'm holding on to your question. Does the term BIPOC allow for the examination of anti-Blackness? I think that is such a key question. And it's something that we all need to consider, right? Or does it continue to perpetuate anti-Blackness? Within, because we know that there is anti-Blackness even within, communities, when I say communities of color, right? There is anti-Blackness sentiment amongst other, racialized majority. So just wanted to highlight that question. Thank you so much for your question. I think it's so key for us to consider and grapple with as we continue with this dialogue. So thank you.
Anna, would you like to share?
Is that Anna Carrion?
Yes.
Is that it? Oh,
yes.
Okay. I've been sitting here really taking it in and wondering whether or not I should even dare to comment, because everything is so on point and everybody has a very defined thought, feeling regarding their experience. And coming from a minority group who's yet a majority, because I come from a country where African slaves that came to our island were as many as have come to at least 2 states in the mainland United States. So that I bring a different perspective, and I let my face show. And I bring a different perspective being Black by not everything looks the way it is. And having been raised, knowing my culture academically, in terms of music, fine arts, history, knowing that some of our great fighters for freedom were Black people. And because I had the blessing of experiencing that and living that, I consider the experience of African Americans in the United States to be so unique. And I think that I agree with some of my colleagues who said that we must not forget that it's very difficult to encompass everyone's experience. I'm also an immigrant. That's a unique experience in itself. So that it is so difficult to put every group's experience and really make it meaningful and relevant to their history. So what do? We need to remember to remain united, because at the end of the day, and not meaning to insult anybody, this is a systemic issue worldwide, that white men have been the dominant culture, and that white men has been historically, and I use empirical data here, historically known for being fearful of what he doesn't know. So hence, we have come to experience all this tumultuous experiences in life, no matter where we come from, or what we bring to the table. But again, I want to highlight that the experience of the indigenous people in America and then the African Americans is so unique that I don't think that using BIPOC or bipolar or whatever it is to put some humor into it, not to offend anybody, but I'm getting emotional about it, so humor takes care of it. That let's remain focused in where the attention needs to come, at what time, and for what reason. Because, and I'm going to share an anecdote quickly. I went for my PhD program where I was the only Latina, and there was another Puerto Rican that didn't consider herself to be in the immigrant piece because she's not. And she happened to be Black. And we connected very well because we're both Latinas. And she gave me the great experience of my life, because she said to me one day, Anna, we are both Latina, but our experiences are very different, because whatever you are, the color of your skin doesn't represent it. And that for me, my audience right now, meant the world, because we sometimes forget where the focus needs to be. So that's my opinion. In my humble opinion and experience, the African American experience is unique, and the American indigenous experience is unique. And I come from a country where Indians were eliminated in 40 years. So that's an experience in itself. So less without offending anyone's opinion and respecting everybody's opinion, let's keep the focus where it needs to come, so that we hopefully can get services to those that are most deserving at this point, given what we are encountering and the numbers that we're encountering through COVID and to everything that we come through. So thank you, and thank you for hearing me, and thank you for allowing me to participate. I'm getting out of this so rich and so supported, and have learned a lot from all of my colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much for sharing openly with us. I think you bring up a really great point. You know, the more time we spend debating as communities over which acronym we choose to represent ourselves, the less focus our communities have from us, you know? So you definitely bring up some great points. I definitely want to highlight how unique each culture is, and it's extremely difficult to find a term that encompasses all of that differences.
But let's focus on which one of our groups needs the advocacy and the help the most, and let's focus on that order as social workers, because that's what we got to do. We advocate for whoever is at the greatest need at any given time, and we might have to refocus every now and then, and it's okay. And there might be a group that consistently stays on the top. And I have to say that I cannot take any one of those two groups and move them here and now, because in my 35 years of experience, I just always see them on the top of the needed list. And this is not to negate the other groups, the immigrant groups, or the Asian group, the Korean groups. I'm not diminishing anyone, but just trying to see if we could just focus and refocus as needed. And thank you again.
Thank you. Felix, I believe you were next.
Yep. Hi. So I have a lot of thoughts, but I do want to say, as a young person, I really appreciate the older voices in the room that have been going on, because they've watched the evolution of terms way more than I ever have. So I just wanted to highlight that and appreciate it for sure. The reason I originally raised my hand is because an earlier speaker said to include an A in the BIPOC. And as an Asian person, I disagree vehemently with that, because from my understanding, and maybe it was talked about before, but I had a client, so I came late, basically. My understanding of the term BIPOC, while I don't super like it a lot, full disclosure, the BI is supposed to highlight that specific type of marginalization that Black and Indigenous folks have faced in this country, right? And I'm a Filipino person who ancestors were deeply colonized, right? There's so much pain there. There have been Filipino children in human zoos in this country, right? So we could talk all about how my specific people have been like marginalized, and right, it is not the same kind of marginalization as Black and Indigenous folks. So to put an A in there seems like it's totally erasing the reason why we have BIPOC. And again, I don't completely like it. I always understood it as a solidarity term that was meant to uplift those specific groups while bringing us together. Do I use it sometimes? Yeah. It is not my favorite term. I actually use the term racially marginalized much more, because I think that makes more sense. That's what we're talking about. And I think that we need to be talking more specifically. Like, I often see people talk about, for example, slavery, and then keep saying people of color, people of color. I'm like, you're not talking about me. You're talking about Black people. You can name it. And there's for some reason, we have to like meld everybody together, and there's really no reason for that. So I think that while BIPOC is a term that could be used, we can just be more specific in language. I use racially marginalized. I also want to say that racism acts differently for different folks, right? The racism I experience is not anti-Blackness, and that is so insidious that we have to name it that way. Like, we just are kind of skirting it because we don't want to face, like, you can face racism, but if you're facing anti-Blackness, Indigenous genocide, those things head on, is definitely, it's different, and naming them is to me is very different, and we like avoid it to kind of what's the word, like make it prettier, I guess. I don't know, and it doesn't make me really uncomfortable. So the way that I speak is I try to keep that in mind and not kind of put it all in one melting pot, because we like to do this in our melting pot country that people like to proclaim America is. And then the last thing that I want to say is something that was actually brought up in the chat that I had like said something about it, and then it got brought up again. So I just want to voice it. So maybe folks who can't hear or can't see the chat or read it can also be brought into the conversation. The idea that we're all human, while this is true, I think Mackenzie said that, like, we're not all being treated with human decency, right? So to say that we're all human erases our racial experiences, and it's very, very reminiscent of the times, just for one example, my white first year internship field supervisor told me straight to my face, well, I don't see people of color, I just see people. And I had to then use that to like be a learning experience, not for me, the intern, but for my supervisor. And that's always going to be a point of trauma in the education that we have to do as marginalized people to people who just don't know any better. And while some folks, I think if you feel good about human, you can use that for yourself. I personally, and I know a lot of other folks personally, don't like that term because of the ways it's been used to erase us. So I just wanted to say that out loud so that I could address it that was already in the chat, but I appreciate the space to talk about it. Yeah, I don't know how to end it, so I'm gonna.
Thank you so much, Felix, for sharing and being so open with us. You bring up some great points. And I just want to echo something that I saw in the chat. Betty said, deep Felix, are we afraid to be specific? And I think personally for me, I can see how people are afraid to be specific. So you definitely brought up some great points. Thank you so much.
And Felix, I always appreciate when you come on and speak. I've seen you at other town halls. Thank you again for bringing us back to, are we facing anti-Blackness, right? And are we afraid to face that? Are we facing that? Are we afraid to face that? That question came up a little bit before about, does the term BIPOC prevent examination of anti-Blackness? And in what ways does that serve us, right? When we kind of skirt away from that and don't think about anti-Blackness and just like don't go there and not consider the fact that, as you said, Felix, all racism is not the same, right? Depending on how you're situated, you're going to experience it differently. So thank you for highlighting that. So many, so rich, so many good points coming out. Thank you.
Abira, I believe you were next.
Oh, thank you. I apologize if I offend anyone. I'm also from New York. And just to give you a little background of my my family genealogy, I am proud to say I'm Black, I'm African American, but I'm also Cubano. I'm also Indigenous, Native American. I am African slave from the South and a little bit of Italian in there somewhere. So I am a nice mix of everyone. And I don't have a problem using BIPOC so much, but the problem that I do have is that we as African American people that for the most part are mixed with so many different things are forgotten. The terms that we utilize sometimes forgets the history that we have gone through as an individual group. And although marginalized people, we're fighting together and we're trying to help each other to be recognized, we have to acknowledge the fact that even just this past summer, when Asian Americans were being attacked, within 6 months, Congress passed laws against it, yet we still can't get an anti-lynching law. So things like that makes it difficult for me to say, yes, I want to include all the marginalized people. And I'm not saying that I don't, because we should all be fighting for the same rights that we are given as Americans. But the reality is that for us, for African Americans, for people who are descended from slaves, we have no culture. We can't say we're Asian American. We can't say that we're indigenous and we have this heritage of powwows and all this spirit walks and beautiful, amazing things that come from all of these different cultures. Our cultures from wherever part of Africa or Haiti or wherever we came from our heritage was taken away from us, erased completely. And we amazing, fundamentally fabulous people that we are, we took that history and made our own, created ourselves from such a low place of not even being considered a full person. And now we've had a president, we've done all of these amazing things. We need a term that signifies what we are as these people that have overcome so much, to the point where when we look at other marginalized groups, we help them. We're the ones who reaches out a hand to help lift them up. And then sometimes we're walked over as they grow over us and become more accepted. So and that's just how I feel about it. I think that we need to, I like kings and queens. I think that we need to find a way to epitomize the significantly American struggle. I mean, we all say, even now, and we always say, oh, you're light skinned. I still get followed in the store. Even to this day, I still got followed in the store. And, just someone was just now writing in a group chat. I just got my master's degree in social work this past summer. And we still had to have these conversations at Stony Brook about, no, you can't say that. No, we find that offensive. In this day and age, young people my age, we're still trying to educate them that we are human. We are people. Thank you, Katy. We need to be seen. And although BIPOC is a great term because it utilizes a lot of people who are struggling, it still blends us into a mishmash in which we are not seen. So thank you, Betty. That's my little rant.
Thank you so much for sharing, Pam. I appreciate how open and honest you are. Abira, would you like to share next?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry for the camera. I don't know, for some reason it's not working. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. It's kind of breaking up a little bit. I'm not sure if that's just on my end.
Yeah. I'm African American. I mean, I'm originally from Africa. I always like to say Africa. Sometimes people want the word. You tell them the country where you're from. They say, "What is that?" I sometimes say, "Oh, that's part of the 50 states of the United States." They don't know. But what we want to know is we blacks we have to stand first ourselves.
Abira, I'm sorry, could you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay,
You
I'm
don't hear
going to
me?
chat. It's really breaking up. I'm going to privately chat you the call-in number. Do you think that you could call in so that we can hear you share?
You can hear me?
No, it's very hard to understand what you're saying because it's chopping.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to put the call-in number in the chat. If that would be better, because we would love to hear what you're saying, but we just can't make out what you're saying.
So
So just give me 1 second with that. I'm sorry.
Okay.
In the meantime, Dawn, would you like to share?
Sure, thank you. This is just, as everyone said, it's such a great opportunity to be here. And I appreciate this conversation because I remember it being presented to me kind of out of the blue. And, I'm also a 70s baby born in 67 in the Bronx, New York. And I have gotten past the idea that some of these are not the terms I grew up with, but just in the present, whenever I think about the word BIPOC, I try to think of three things every time I intend to use it. I think about competence, I think about intention, and I think about consciousness. And I want to share that with you. I'm always thinking, do I have enough understanding of the term to use it? Because we all really get caught up in trends. And so when, you know, Black and Indigenous is clear to me, but I find myself often asking, who is included as people of color? Who are all of the people of color, and why are they included in this group that's supposed to have a specific meaning? So that's something I always think about. I also think about intention, and some of you shared it really brilliantly, is that there are times when I am talking about the Black experience or things that are a part of anti-Blackness. And when I do that, I use Black. I don't use BIPOC because of what some of you talked about. That is a unique experience. And I find that when we start to throw BIPOC, when we're talking about a specific group, someone mentioned the term fear, and I don't think about fear. I think of some of the other words that are used. When we're talking about a Black experience and we use BIPOC, I don't know if it's fearful. I think of it as something else. It feels like it's the easy way out. It feels dismissive. It feels inclusive when it should be exclusive. And so I'm really mindful of that. Again, if we're talking about a situation that appropriately includes all of those groups, then it's appropriate to use. But I think we should be very responsible about what, when and how we use it, and be intentional about it and be conscious, because even as a Black person, it's offensive sometimes when we use BIPOC, but we're trying to explain the experience of a Black person, because it somehow feels, it feels like it's easier for the person, or for me, it just diminishes the experience of the Black person. So I wanted to share that again. I appreciate these conversations. I'm not going to take long, but I just wanted to share those are things I think about. And if someone could answer me, I think it's really important that we are at least clear about who is included as people of color and why. Because one of the other things I'm afraid of, someone mentioned in old school, there was a time where certain Asian communities or certain other communities of color were part of the community that were racist toward Black people. And so again, just making sure we understand why and how we're using those groups, and that we're intentional about it, that we're competent, and that we're conscious of the impact it has when we're having different conversations, especially when we're putting things in writing. And I also just want to say, New York State, I love you all, and I appreciate the work that you do over and over and over again to make us better. And so I just want to let you all know how much myself and all of the staff at the National Office of NASW appreciate your contribution to this association and to the profession. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And thank you for bringing it back to the point of intent. Thank you. We are cutting it close, so I do want to get to everyone who has their hand raised, and I'm so sorry if I missed anyone. But Val Vincent, you're next.
Hi, everybody. My name is Val Vincent, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to meet with all of you. And I have much respect for the social workers from the 60s and 70s who experienced racism much more intensely than I have. And so I want to give a big shout out to my elders from the 60s and 70s. But I just wanted to make a quick point, and thank you for this opportunity, is that I want us to, I think that my feeling is we need to look at attribution. The reason for this is because I think sometimes when we give ourselves labels, then we must ask ourselves, well, what's the reason for this label and who's using this and why? For example, I'm Filipino American like Felix is, but I just wanted to say that the experience here in California, and I practice and work in a suburb south of Los Angeles. And we had a community in South Central Los Angeles in the 90s that had pitted Korean Americans versus African Americans, because there was a very horrible experience where a shopkeeper has shot a young African American lady, and the criminal justice system then exonerated her and upset the Black community. And it was understandable because she was innocent, but the problem was that it divided the African American community versus the Korean American community. And what's brought a solution to that was alliance building between clergy of the African American population and the Korean population. And they established strong alliances which last to this day. So they were able to work in peace with each other. But the divide and conquer is happening now. And what they're doing, especially on YouTube, is they're showing African Americans as the predominant aggressor versus Asian Americans in these YouTube videos. And I question that because I even looked in the statistics of the FBI, and it said that most of the victims of hate crimes are African Americans. So what mainstream society is doing is they're again playing divide and conquer techniques, which tends to separate the Asian American population and the Black American population. So what I'm suggesting is, I think we should stop using labels and perceive ourselves as problem solvers and work and build alliances with specifically the Asian American community and the African American community here in California. And we start to define ourselves and bring some solutions to our interpersonal relationships with each other. So that's what I want to say. And thank you for this chance to participate in this really excellent dialogue.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us that, we don't get true work done when we're dividing and conquering each other. Like, we need to come together as a force. Thank you for reminding us of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Angelique, I believe you were next.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to say much, but first of all, I'm from Minnesota. I think there was someone earlier who's from Minnesota. I'm actually from the Twin Cities, North Minneapolis specifically. And I came up in the 70s. And I say I am Black, that's how I identify. And I've seen various surveys and applications where it has changed, the wording has changed. And the most recent was Black/African American. And it's something in my head. I started to notice, it's really interesting. Through the years, I've always seen Black or African American, something like that. No, it used to be Black, then Black/African American. But it was always white. That never changed. Never changed. White American, never saw it. Always white. I'm just saying that because I thought it was interesting. It just made me think, who keeps changing Black, African American? Who keeps changing those identifiers? And it just anyway, it just stuck in my head. But be that as it may, I have to back up a little. Please forgive me because I'm calling from the hospital bed. But I wanted to attend this, so I don't mean to offend anyone by calling from there. So, I BIPOC. I always say Black. I get offended if someone calls me Negro or something that I don't. I grew up with that, and there are people who have. And for me, I'm a little attitudinal. I'll be honest. Not outwardly so, but if I'm called something, if I'm called Negro or something that I don't identify with, I will correct a person with the quickness, because my thing, I'm all about educating. Call me what I am. Don't call me, I don't care if you're used to Negro or some other term. Call me Black or ask me. Just like BIPOC, when I finally learned what it meant, I have used it, but I'm also respectful. If it's someone I know who is Asian or Hispanic, I will ask them what they prefer. I'm not going to assume. I would never do that because I don't want I don't want anyone to assume with me. Don't do that. I don't like that. For me, it's disrespectful. And I've seen it through the years. And I've spoken up. Don't assume that that's what they want you to call them. Ask them. Just because in your head that's what it is on paper, that's what it is on the news, that's what they use. No, don't do that with them. So I tend to speak up, and maybe I shouldn't, but I do. I don't like it. Don't do it to me, don't do it to other people. They may be soft and not say anything. Well, I'm gonna say something. You don't know if they like it. Just because they don't say anything doesn't mean it's okay. So I'm blathering now and I apologize. But in terms of BIPOC, it's about respect. Don't make assumptions that the next person is going to think it's okay, because it isn't always okay. So read the room, so to speak. Be respectful. Ask them it's okay. You know, I just recently saw the Latinx. I don't even know what that means. It used to be Latina, then Latin. I don't know. I don't even know what that means. And I'm when I get to the point, I know that when I get to the point where I can ask someone, I will, because I don't want to use something just because I saw it, you know. So anyway, enough with my talking. I think I think that's it. I'm sorry.
No, thank you so much. Please don't ever apologize for sharing in this space. That's what we're all here for. And we greatly appreciate you making it tonight. You do bring up a good point. I just kind of want to echo. I think it's so easy for us to get wrapped up in like what we see in the news and the social media, and you know what's popular or trending during the moment. So it's very easy to just identify someone as BIPOC, but like you said, they might not identify themselves as that. So thank you for, you know, taking it down and asking everyone individually what they would like to be referred to as. I think that's something we can all work on, definitely. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Angelique.
Thank you for having me.
And Robert, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, this is the last round. I don't want to be a mic hog. You know, Mr. Reyes, on your point about Natasha Harlins, what really chapped my hide was that the same judge that gave the Korean grocer probation for taking a life sentenced a Black man to 6 months in prison for kicking his dog. So basically, it was translated. How I saw it is that that particular judge and society in general thought the welfare of an animal was higher than it was of a human being. That enough of that. And then the reason why, like I typed in text, that the B and the I are relevant is because since 1492, when that mass murderer Columbus came over and started killing off Native Americans, they actually practiced genocide against Native Americans. You got the Trail of Tears. You got very many other things. I'm about 1/5 Native American, by the way. My great-great-grandmother was a full-blood Mohawk Indian. And then the Black experience of descendants of African Americans, our experience, we've been dehumanized, enslaved, and attempted genocide in some cases since 1619. So I think it's very relevant that the B and the I be where they are. It has to be the B and I and the B would not make sense. That's just me. And that's my last word.
Thank you so much for reminding us, Robert. I think that was a great last point. Before I wrap up, I just want to ask if there was anyone who had their hand up and I missed it and would still like to share, please feel free to do so.
So I didn't have my hand up, Olivia, but I kind of wanted to gently share for those of you brave enough to stay on a little later. No, Melody, my name's Melodie Lopez. I'm Hopi, Navajo, and Pueblo, and I'm a MSW from a few decades ago. I really wanted to kind of address the I, the Indigenous, No other speaker here with 100 plus of everybody on board really has addressed too much of indigeneity. And I've got to say that that word is very complex. A lot of people do not use indigenous because everybody on this call is indigenous to somewhere. You might be indigenous to the Philippines. You might be indigenous to Nigeria. You might be indigenous to France or Germany. Everyone is indigenous. So a lot of Native people have problems with that. And someone mentioned, say who we are. So if you're going to say, I heard something last night on NASW from an indigenous person, you're going to be like, there was this Hopi social worker. Yes, because we are not a united group. And the one thing that does unite us is colonization. And the one thing that unites us is we are actually political entities. Even though we're in the United States, we have our own governments, police departments, health entities, our own laws, roads, schools. All of that really separates the Native American population from other ethnic groups. So sometimes we even talk about there's no such thing as the Native American, no such thing as American Indian. There are over 570 different tribes all around with our own languages, our own spirituality, our own practices, our very specific histories. So I is very complex. And somebody did actually mention in there, and I'm so glad you did, about different people, Central, South Americans, and claiming that indigeneity to move away from whiteness. And like, I have all the respect in the world for that. And so indigenous is an inclusive term. So you also got to be careful on who is indigenous and what does that mean. So I kind of just wanted to close with the concept that indigeneity is a complex term. And I'm so grateful to NASW New York City for this great conversation.
Thank you so much for bringing that into attention, Melodie. All great points once again. I think we can all agree how powerful this session was, and it's very complex. There's always going to be individuals who aren't happy with the acronyms that we use, but this was a great conversation. I think this has been my favorite town hall, just because the conversations between participants, I loved how we flowed off of each other and everyone was so open and honest and respectful. And sometimes when having conversations and it gets into a debate and whatnot, it can steer off to being disrespectful. So I just want to appreciate everyone here who shared tonight, who shared in the chat, for keeping a respectful tone for everyone. Going forward, I do think that our NASW post, we will include messaging that states that BIPOC does not encompass all of these races. And our intention is to include everyone who faces racism based on the color of their skin, at least for this initiative, as to who speaks in the town halls. So it can get very complex, but I appreciate everyone who shared tonight. And if there are any other suggestions for acronyms, I would love the suggestions in the chat, just so we can look it over after this meeting. But other than that, I just want to say thank you all for joining us tonight, and have a great night, everyone.
Yes. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Just love this conversation. I really feel, we always have rich discussions, but I really feel like this one was particularly special. There was something very, very special about this conversation, and so rich and so complex, and yet we engaged in a dialogue. We didn't always agree, had different perspectives on it, but just really appreciated our just showing up and being in space and having this conversation. And Melodie, thank you. I believe that the way you closed us out in terms of really centering and really, uplifting what does indigenous mean and when do we use that term, and just all of that. Thank you for highlighting the complexities just of that term in and of itself, right? I think it just goes to highlight the complexities and the nuances which we've been discussing this whole evening of BIPOC. And one thing that a couple of things that I'm walking away with, and I encourage all of us to walk away with, is this idea of the intentionality, right? What is the intention of us using that term? When do we use that term? And I think it was somebody who mentioned intentionality as well as consciousness. So being conscious of when we're using that term, why we're using that term, and also potentially when we're using that term, potentially who does it harm? Who are we, who are we like missing out on? And so I think that even no matter what the term we're using, those are key points, I think, for all of us to remind ourselves, what is our intention? Who are we potentially harming through that? And who are we uplifting? And at what point, when do we need to be inclusive, right? Solidarity, but also when do we need to be exclusive? This is what someone mentioned. When do we need to be exclusive to explicitly center the experiences of a particular group? So those are just a few things that I'm walking away with. I just, again, so appreciate all of you being here, all of you who have spoken, all of you who have shared in the chat, and just your presence with us this evening. Thank you so much. And we're looking forward to continued town halls. Thank you.
And I do just want to share that the link to register for the next town hall on November 10th is shared in the chat by Amelia.